The first thing Marta noticed was the light. Not the light itself. She'd seen lights her whole life. Headlamps swinging across the ceiling at 2 a.m., the amber smear of street lamps through net curtains, the blue pulse of her brother's old games console. This was different. This was a light that hovered. A light that knew it was being watched and didn't care. She was standing in the car park of the Tesco Extra on Welland Road, North Sheffield, at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in November, holding a bag that contained a 4-pack of Lager she hadn't wanted but had bought anyway, because the walk home past the canal was longer without something to carry. She was looking up. The light was red. It sat above the far end of the car park, maybe 30 meters off the ground, above the trolley bay and the dark mouth of the recycling compound. It wasn't moving. Then it split into 4. She had time to think. That's a drone. Maybe. Or some kid's nonsense. Before the 4 lights began to spread, and then collapse back into 1. And then the 1 light was white, and it was coming down. And Marta had the distinct, biological sensation of being a very small animal in a very open field, and she ran. She ran across the car park. She ran past the 24-hour cash point and the shuttered Greggs. She ran up Burnham Street and did not stop until she hit the door of her own, flat, and was as inside with her back against it, breathing through her nose, trying to be quiet so she didn't wake her neighbor's dog. She stood there for a long time in the dark. The Lager was still in her hand. She hadn't dropped it. That detail would matter later, though she couldn't have said why. Her name was Marta Koval. She was 34. She had come to Sheffield from Kiev at 19, with her brother Dimitro, and Dimitro had gone home again 12 years later when their mother got sick, and Marta had not gone with him, because she had a job and a lease and a box of things that had taken too long to accumulate to give up. She had the sort of life that wasn't remarkable in any particular direction. She repaired industrial embroidery machines for a company in Attercliffe. She called her brother on Sundays. She ate cereal for dinner more often than she'd tell anyone. She had a scar on her left palm from a machine fault 3 years ago, and she ran her thumb across it when she was thinking. She did not tell anyone about the light. She went back to the Tesco the next day for bread and milk, and stood at the far end of the car park for a while looking up at nothing. The sky was the standard Sheffield gray, pigeons, cracked seagull, working its way inland from wherever seagulls came from when they visited cities. Nothing that hovered, nothing that split. She went home with her bread and milk. 3 days later they came to her, not with lights this time, not with any drama. She was eating cereal at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning, watching the condensation on the window, and there was a knock at her door. She opened it, and there were 2 of them standing in the hallway. They were short, not impossibly short. They would have passed for human from a distance, in a crowd, but close up the proportions were off in a way she couldn't immediately name. Longer fingers, eyes that were the color of old glass and did not quite track the way human eyes tracked. The movement a beat too smooth, too deliberate, like a camera on a gimbal rather than eyes in a skull. They were wearing ordinary clothes, jeans and jackets. One of them was carrying a wheeled suitcase. The one without the suitcase said, in accented English, "You are Marta Koval. We were told you had a room. We were told you might understand." Marta looked at them for a long time. She ran her thumb across the scar on her palm. "Told you that," she said. "The network," said the one with the suitcase. And the word had a texture that suggested it meant something more than the English word implied. Something older, something that preceded language, like a word for the feeling of recognizing a face you've never met. She let them in. She didn't know why. Or she did know why, but she couldn't have explained it in a way that would have satisfied anyone reasonable. It had something to do with the light splitting into 4. It had something to do with the Lager she hadn't dropped. She was the kind of person who stayed, when staying was the harder thing, and she had decided something in that car park, standing in the wind, though she hadn't known she was deciding it. She made tea. She was very aware that this was a strange thing to do, and she made it anyway, because the ritual of it helped her hands. "You don't have to be afraid," said the one she'd decide to call Nessa, because the alien's real name had 3 stops in it that human teeth weren't for. "I'm not afraid," Marta said. "I'm confused. There's a difference." Nessa said, "Yes, there is. The other one, The one with the suitcase she would call Gal. Gal sat in the corner of the kitchen on the chair nearest the window and watched the street with those two smooth eyes. Gal didn't speak much. Gal had a quality of absolute stillness that was either very calming or very unnerving depending on what else was happening. Marta found after the first day that she had stopped noticing it. This surprised her. "How many of you are there?" Marta asked. "Here, in the city, 11, Nessa said. "And how many cities?" A pause. The pause was its own answer. "Right," said Marta. She had a spare room. It was small, with a single bed and a lamp she'd bought from a car boot sale, and never got around to replacing the shade on. She showed them to it. They stood in the doorway and looked at it. The way people look at a room they've been told is adequate, and are trying to determine whether adequate is going to be enough. Nessa said once. "This will do," Nessa said. "For how long?" Marta asked. "We don't know yet," Nessa said. Marta thought about that. She leaned against the doorframe. "What are you waiting for?" Gal, from behind her, said, "A signal." "What kind of signal?" Neither of them answered. Gal went back to watching the window. Nessa began with methodical care to unpack the suitcase. The contents were mostly ordinary. Clothes, a few items Marta didn't recognize and didn't ask about, a small object that glowed faintly, and that Nessa set on the windowsill, the way you'd set a nightlight. Marta watched this and thought about the word signal and thought about the light over the Tesco car park splitting into 4 and understood. In the way you understand things that you can't quite prove, that she was now part of something that had been in motion long before she stood in that car park on a Tuesday night in November. She went to bed. She lay in the dark. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, she made porridge, and there was enough for 3. The first week was the strangest week. After that, it became something she had no word for, not normal, but inhabited. She went to work. She came home. Nessa was often in the kitchen or the sitting room, reading from a small device the size and thickness of a credit card that contained, apparently, everything. Gal was often at the window. Marta learned not to leave dishes in the sink because Nessa had an aversion to standing water that was entirely biological and non-negotiable. She learned that Gal found the sound of rain distressing on some frequency she couldn't hear, and so she bought a white noise machine secondhand from a charity shop, and this was so effective and so simple a solution that Gal looked at her afterward with those glass-colored eyes and said, "How did you know to do that?" "I didn't," Marta said. "I guessed. You looked like you were in pain." Gal processed this. "Pain," Gal said, the word careful in an alien mouth. "Yes, that is approximately correct." She called her brother on the Sunday. She did not tell him. She said work was fine, and yes, she was eating, and yes, she was sleeping, and no, there was. She had nothing wrong. He told her their mother was stable. She told him that was good. She ran her thumb across her scar. She sat in the kitchen for a while. Nessa came in and filled a glass with water, and stood at the sink, not quite drinking it, and said, "Why here? Why Sheffield?" "The coordinates," Nessa said. "What coordinates?" "The network plots, where the..." A pause in which Nessa selected a word from a catalog of inadequate human words. "The open ones are the ones who are capable of not running." Marta thought about the car park. She thought about running and about the moment she'd stopped. "People run," she said. "Yes. Did you observe that? Before you came to me?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's unsettling," she said. "Yes," Nessa said. "We apologize for that." It was the most genuinely alien things Nessa had said so far. Not the admission of surveillance, the apology. There was something in it that was not quite the shape of a human apology. It didn't have the same contrition in it, the same self-referential embarrassment. It was more like a statement of fact about regret. "We note that this caused discomfort. We register that as undesirable." Marta found she preferred it to the humankind. "Okay," she said. The second week, the man across the street started watching the flat. Marta noticed him first. She noticed things. It was part of the job, reading machine tolerances, knowing when a deviation was significant. The man was in a Vauxhall Astra, parked 40 meters west, and he was there in the morning when she left for work, and gone by the time she came back, but present again. By 9 in the evening, he had a flask. He was good enough not to look directly at the flat more than once every few minutes. But Marta had a particular view from her kitchen window. and the angle caught the reflection in his driver's side mirror. And he was watching, she told Nessa. Nessa was quiet for a time that felt long even by Nessa's standards. Then, how many of them? I've only seen one. That doesn't mean one. No, Nessa said. It does not. Gal at the window had gone very still. Not the ordinary Gal stillness, but a different quality. Compressed like something before a result. They found us, Gal said. Not surprised. Tone of a person confirming a suspicion they'd been carrying for some time. What do they want? Marta asked. To end the signal before it's sent, Nessa said. We carry information. Information that certain governments on this planet have determined they would prefer not to be transmitted. And is that information, Marta started. It is not a weapon, Nessa said, with the firmness of someone who had been asked this before. It is data, biological, agricultural, the methods by which a species survives a transition that your planet is approaching. Your governments are aware that this transition exists. Some of them have decided that managing the information about it is more important than the information itself. Marta sat with that. She ran her thumb across her scar. Survives, she said. Yes, and without it. Some of you will, said. Many fewer. She went to bed again and again. She did not sleep quickly, and when she did sleep, she dreamed of the Tesco car park and the light splitting and herself standing there. And in the dream, she didn't run. In the dream, she walked toward it. She wasn't sure if that was bravery or stupidity or just the peculiar logic of dreaming, where the most frightening thing becomes the most natural. She woke at 4 a.m. and lay there listening to the white noise machine and thinking about the man in the Vauxhall Astra. She thought about what she was and what she saw it. She thought about a farm in Brazil in 1957 and a forester in Scottish woods and a road in New Hampshire and the particular quality of being a human being who saw something in the sky and didn't know what to do with what they'd seen. She thought about the way Gal's eyes moved over a street, reading it the way she read a machine, patiently, with the understanding that what it was telling you was always more reliable than what you thought you already knew. At 5 a.m. she got up. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. She made a list. The Vauxhall Astra left at 6:15 every morning and returned between 8 and 9. During that window, the driver, she'd decided to call him Peterson, for no particular reason, just because he needed a name, ate something from a paper bag and used his phone and was occupied. She didn't know how many there were total. She knew her building had one exit she used and a fire door in the back that she had never used because it opened onto an alleyway behind the bins, and the code panel on the inside was broken, and you had to prop it with a brick. Someone had helpfully left there for the purpose. She presented her list to Nessa and Gal. At 5:30 in the morning, they looked at it. Gal picked it up and turned it over, the way an alien picks up a piece of human paper and turns it over. Gal read it twice. Then Gal set it down. This is a very specific plan, Gal said. Yes, said Marta. You made it tonight. I didn't sleep. You are not afraid, Gal said. Not a statement exactly, more a recalibration. I am absolutely afraid, Marta said. The plan is because I'm afraid. Fear and action are not opposites. You point the fear at something useful. She paused. She had not articulated that thought before. It had just come out. The way things do at 5 in the morning when you've been lying in the dark long enough. Also, she said, I've been fixing machines for 15 years. You learn to read a system. There's always a window when it's most vulnerable and always one when it's most stable. You work around both. Nessa was looking at her with that careful alien attention. The network picked well, Nessa said quietly, to no one in particular. They left before dawn. Not dramatically. That was the thing. It was the least dramatic thing. Marta put her work bag over her shoulder, because it was the largest bag she owned and it looked ordinary. Nessa wore the jacket. Gal kept the small glowing thing tucked inside a coat that was too warm for November, but not absurdly so. They went out the back, through the fire door, past the brick, propped against the bottom, into the alley that smelled of bins and autumn. Marta knew this alley because she'd taken it once when she'd lost her keys and needed to let herself in through a window, and it connected through a cut to Birch Road and from Birch Road to the industrial estate, and from there to the network of cycle paths along the old rail line that had been converted in the 90s and which Marta had cycled. along enough times in the flat gray light of early mornings that she knew exactly where the CCTV cameras were and weren't. She walked and they followed her, and nobody said much. The thing about Sheffield, Marta had always thought, was that it was full of levels. Hills and valleys and sudden drops and unexpected rises. The city arranged in layers, so that from one street, you could look down on a whole district, and from the next, you were looking up at one. It was a city built by people who had to manage uneven ground, who had learned to work with the inconvenient terrain rather than against it. She had always felt that this was related to the particular stubbornness of the place, the way it refused to stop being what it was, regardless of what closed or moved on. She thought about this as she walked in the dark. She thought about it, because thinking about something concrete and true kept the fear where it was useful, pointed at the problem, and not at herself. They got to the industrial estate by 6:30. There was a loading bay Martin knew from a delivery job a friend had done years ago, sheltered, out of sight from the main road. They waited there. She had made calls the night before, from the flat, while Nessa and Gal slept. She had called two people. One was a man named Dale, who had driven lorries for 15 years and owed her a favor from a complicated incident involving a lathe and a tax return that she had never explained to anyone. The other was a woman named Suki, who ran a small freight company out of Rotherham, and whom Marta had met at an industry conference 4 years ago and had liked immediately because Suki asked questions that suggested she actually wanted the answer. Dale arrived at 6:42 in a transit van that smelled of oil and radio too. Suki was with him, which Marta hadn't expected. She looked at Marta over Dale's shoulder and said, "You sounded like you were in trouble. I don't let Dale do things unsupervised." "Fair," said Marta. Dale looked at Nessa. Dale looked at Gal. Dale looked at Marta. "Right," Dale said. "Van now. Questions later." This was why Marta had called him. They drove northwest. Marta sat in the back with Nessa, and Gal and Suki sat in the passenger seat asking Dale questions he was declining to answer. Outside the small windows, the city slid past and became motorway and became moorland, the light coming up flat and cold over the hills. Gal watched it. The glowing thing was in Gal's hands now, and Marta watched it pulse, once, twice, slow rhythm like a heartbeat slowing toward rest. "Is it time?" Marta asked. "Nearly," Nessa said. "We need height and distance from the interference. The cities, the density of signal, of your communications technologies, it complicates the transmission. Out there," Nessa nodded toward the moorland. "It's cleaner." Marta nodded. She understood the principle. She'd had to move machines away from fluorescent lighting before, because the frequency interfered with the calibration sensors. The universe, she had come to think, operated on similar principles whether you were at a molecular scale or a civilizational one. Interference was interference. You found the clean signal and you worked from there. They stopped on a track off the A6102, a place Marta knew because she'd pulled over there once in a breakdown and waited for the AA for 2 hours, watching the weather come in off the high. They got out of the van. The wind was immediate and specific, the kind of wind that had no interest in you personally but was going to affect you regardless. Dale and Suki stood by the van. Suki had her arms folded and was watching with an expression that Marta recognized. The expression, someone who has revised their model of reality twice in the last 40 minutes, and is revising it a third time, and finding that each revision makes the next one easier. Nessa and Gal moved away from the van, out into the open. Gal held the small device up. In the daylight, weak November daylight, the sun barely clearing the horizon. The glow from it was faint, easy to miss. But Marta could see it. She could see the pattern in it, the particular rhythm. And she understood with the certainty of someone who had spent 15 years reading the behavior of complex systems that this was a transmission, and that it was going, and that somewhere impossibly far away something was receiving it. Time 9. It took minutes, she knew, because she watched the time on her phone. 9 minutes of standing in the wind on a Yorkshire moor with 2 aliens and a transit van and Suki from Rotherham, asking quiet, precise questions that Nessa was answering in a way that suggested Nessa had decided Suki was worth the effort. At the end of 9 minutes, Gal lowered the device. "Done," Gal said. Marta breathed. She looked at the sky. Low cloud, gray-white, the horizon smudged with light. An ordinary sky. A sky that held somewhere very far beyond its visible edge. A place where what had just been sent would be read and used and passed on. She thought about the forester in the Scottish woods in 1979, up a path on an ordinary workday, and finding a thing in a clearing that made no sense within the categories he had available. She thought about a couple on a road in New Hampshire, the dark coming down, the stars appearing one by one, and the moment before everything changed. She thought about a farmer in Brazil in the 1950s working a night field under a sky so dark you could see the whole sweep of the galaxy, and what it would be like to stand in that field and find that the galaxy had noticed you back. She thought about standing in a Tesco car park holding a 4-pack of Lager, and the light that had not moved, and then had split into 4, and then had come down, and herself running and then not running. The moment of not running, that was the thing, she thought. That was the whole thing, not the heroism of it. There was no heroism in it, not really. It was fear pointed in a useful direction, but the decision in it. The moment of staying, when staying was harder and more uncertain than going. She thought this might be the most human thing there was. Not the intelligence, or the ingenuity, or the stubbornness, though all of those were part of it. The decision to stay and be present to the thing that was frightening and let it be what it was. The wind came in off the moor. It was very cold and very clean. Nessa came and stood beside her. The signal carries data for agricultural yields, Nessa said. For soil composition management for a warming climate. For water table modeling and crop adaptation. For the materials science behind infrastructure that survives the new temperature gradients. It carries the work of 7 species across 4 star systems who have passed through transitions similar to the one your planet is entering. Carries what they learned, what worked and what did not. A pause. Your governments wanted this suppressed because knowledge of an approaching transition implies crisis. An implied crisis is difficult to manage. They preferred to manage the knowledge. It is a very human failure. Is it? Marta said. The reasoning is very recognizable across species, Nessa said. The preference for controlling information over distributing it. The calculation that some lives are more manageable as a cost than as a constituency. Nessa paused. But the decision to stay in a car park at midnight, to open a door, to make tea, to think practically about a fire exit and a brick, that is not recognizable across species. That is specifically yours. Marta looked at the scar on her palm. She thought about what she was made of. Not philosophically, but practically. She was made of years of fixing things that were broken, reading tolerances, of understanding that most systems fail not because they're overwhelmed, but because no one was paying attention at the right moment. She was made of a car park in November and a light that split into 4. She was made of Sunday phone calls to her brother and cereal for dinner, and a white noise machine from a charity shop. What happens now? She asked. The data is received, Nessa said. It enters the open source networks your people are building, the ones your governments don't control. It will be attributed to research institutions in countries where suppression is less effective. It will be read by agricultural engineers, by soil scientists, by civil engineers working on flood infrastructure, by the people actually doing the work of keeping things alive. A pause. It will be used. Not by everyone. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough, Marta repeated. Enough, Nessa said. Marta put her hands in her pockets. She thought about her brother calling on Sunday and telling her their mother was stable. She thought about the word stable and what it meant. Not recovered, not unchanged, but holding. Maintaining equilibrium under pressure. Enough. She walked back to the van. Suki was writing things in a small notebook with the focused intensity of someone who has just identified the most important project of their life. Dale was leaning on the van drinking from a thermos, looking at the moorland with the expression of a man who has decided to simply accept that this is the kind of Tuesday it is. All good? He said, when Marta reached him. Yeah, she said. You want tea? She thought about Nessa making tea at the kitchen table, about the ritual of it helping her hands, about how the first thing she'd done, when 2 aliens appeared at her door, at 7 in the morning was put the kettle on, and she thought, yes, probably this is a human thing. Probably this is one of the things. Please, she said. He poured her some from the thermos. It was terrible tea, sweet and overbrewed. The kind that had been sitting since 6 a.m., she drank it. Gal came and stood near the van and looked at the thermos. "Would you like some?" Dale asked. A long pause. "What is it?" "Tea." Another pause. "I have read about tea," Gal said. Dale poured some into the thermos lid and held it out. Gal took it with those long, careful fingers, held it close, regarded it with the total seriousness that Gal brought to all observations, took a small sip, processed. "It is," Gal said slowly. "Not what I expected." "That's tea, yeah," Dale said. "Never is." The wind moved through the brown grass of the moor. The light was coming up properly now. The cloud thinning at the edge of the horizon, a thin line of pale yellow beginning to define where the world ended and the sky started. In the distance, Sheffield was waking up, the haze of it just visible between the ridgelines. An ordinary city in an ordinary morning, unaware of itself, which was most of what ordinary meant. Nessa came to stand beside Marta. "You should know," Nessa said, "that the people in the car, the watchers, Peterson," Marta said, "if that's what you want to call him, they will look for you, I know." "What will you do?" Marta thought about this. She thought about her flat and her lathe, and her Sunday phone calls, and the charity shop white noise machine. She thought about the scar on her palm, and the machine fault that had caused it, and the way she'd learned, after, to read the particular vibration that preceded that kind of fault, so that she could stop it before it happened. She thought about the brick propped in the fire door that someone had helpfully left it for the purpose. "I'll go to work," she said. "I'll be a person who goes to work and eats cereal for dinner and calls her brother on Sundays. And if they come, then I'll deal with that." She paused. "I'm good at reading when something is about to go wrong. I've had practice." Nessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "We may need to contact you again. I know. You understand what that means, the risk." "Yes, and?" Marta looked at the horizon. At the line of yellow widening, the sky deciding to be the next day properly. She thought about the word enough, and about the word stable, and about standing in a car park in the dark holding Lager. She hadn't wanted but had bought anyway, because the walk home was longer without something to carry. "I didn't drop the Lager," she said. Nessa looked at her. "I don't understand. That night in the car park, when I ran, I didn't drop the bag." She turned the thermos lid over in her hands. "I didn't know why that mattered at the time. I think it was just, I'm the kind of person who holds on to things." A pause. "You can contact me again." They drove back down the hill as the day came up around them, full and cold and ordinary, full of all the usual things. Traffic beginning, a world in motion, carrying inside it, tucked into its open networks, and its soil science and its agricultural engineering, and its quiet ongoing work of figuring out how to stay alive on a warming planet. Something new. Something that had come a very long way to get there. Gal watched the road from the window of the van. Marta watched the sky. She was not afraid. Or she was afraid, and she had put it somewhere useful, the way she always had, the way she would again. The light had split into 4, and she had run, and then she had stopped running, and that was the whole story, really, the whole human story, the one that kept getting told, across all the terrifying distances of the universe. Running, and then turning back, and then staying to see what it was. She ran her thumb as across the scar on her palm. The road came down from the moor, and the city opened up below them. Sheffield in November, the sky going silver-white above the hills. And Marta Koval went home.